All right, we'll be in Matthew 20, and this will conclude the series or couple of weeks of who will sit next to Jesus in his kingdom. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll get into the kingdom of heaven or kingdom of God, actually beginning in Genesis. All right, then we'll run it through Israel, the kingdom of David, and things like that, and then probably get into the book of Revelation briefly or something, just to kind of look at that so that we understand what's going on, and then even try to make a connection with Israel today. Where does Israel stand? And maybe even what should be the church's response to Israel, and things like that, based on covenants of the Old Testament, and then maybe even look at some of these covenants that God had made with Israel, like the Abrahamic covenant. Is it still standing? Is it still binding on Israel? And things like that, and see what we can learn through that. Genesis chapter 20, verse 24 through 28, and then also we may briefly look over in Mark 10. Mark, there's the translations are a little different in Mark than what they are in Matthew, but basically the words are the same idea of the words, and so we'll look at that. But Matthew 20, verse 24, and it reads, "And when the 10 heard it," so we'll talk about what they heard, "they were moved with indignation against the two brethren. But Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many." Now, this is the second half, right, of the question of James and John and their mother in the verses preceding this, who is going to sit next to the Lord in the kingdom. Matthew tells us that the mother of James and John, she's the one that wants to know, will you allow my two boys to sit next to you, one on the right, one on the left? Mark tells us that James and John come up and ask him, can we sit on your right and your left? And so all three of them are coming to the Lord. There's a concerted effort here. I do think that it was probably more mom's idea. Just the way that Matthew reads, and James and John are there as well, asking, wanting to know. Maybe they know. It's like, man, Mom, this gets back to the other guys. They're not going to be very happy. Mama says it doesn't matter. I want this for you, right? We looked at it as a literal position and a literal potentate. And what's the point of that? It's a real kingdom. It's a real position. There's a real king. Okay, now, so the other disciples hear about this. And how are they going to respond? How are they going to respond? Those of you that you have children, if you give one something, what do you have to do for the other one? You better give them something also. I don't know why. I even tell them, I was like, why? Why can't we not give them something, and you just be thankful that I gave it to him or to her? You don't have to have something, okay? But that's not real life. No, it's not real life. That would be a perfect world. All right. Even in front of Jesus, that doesn't happen. So think about that. In front of God Almighty himself, that doesn't happen. Why do you get something and we don't? Okay. Oh man. That just, I'm getting this mental picture now. I was talking about this. I didn't really see that before, but anyhow. All right, so what happened? So we come to verse 24 through 28, and the Lord gives them some direction. There is the desire of the apostles, but now there's some direction. Now, and I may be wrong, and I confess I may be wrong, but I'm trying to kind of look at exactly what is happening and just what is being said and revealed. Okay, I believe that that verse 24 through 28, that this entire section of verses is directed towards the 10, and maybe not towards James and John. Now, I know that may sound maybe a little odd or crazy, and I'm hoping to kind of explain that and pull this out. But I really think he's talking to these 10 that heard it. Okay, so this is the direction. Notice, if you would, in verse 24, the reaction of the apostles. Now, the apostles in verse 24 says, and when they heard it, and heard what? Well, that James and John wanted to sit next to Christ in the kingdom. When they heard this, but not only when they heard this, but when they heard the requirements for sitting next to Christ, which would be drinking of his cup and partaking in his baptism, James and John were told by Christ that they would actually partake of his cup and his baptism, which the context reveals us, but also lets us know that the cup that Christ is going to drink from is not the wrath of God. It is not the wrath of God. Okay, God was not pouring out wrath on his son. Wrath is going to come later on those who don't receive him. Okay, and that's a whole nother thing, I know, but it's not the wrath of God. It's not, bearing the sins of the world on humanity and all of that. Okay, we'll see in verse 28 what that is. We talked about that last week. And then they also heard that it was going to be for whomever the Father chose. Whoever was worthy would be the one that would have the opportunity. Now, when they heard this, they are moved with indignation. Now, the translators translate the word, okay, the word indignation has the meaning of it is displeasure. Okay, in Mark's gospel, they actually translate the word. In Matthew, it's translated indignation. In Mark, it is translated great displeasure. Okay, Mark 10, verse number, let me see, verse number 41. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be much displeased. Displeased in Mark 10:41. It's the same word, indignation and displeased, and the idea of it is displeasure. Okay, and although there's a difference of translation here, which is good, and I'm glad that they did translate it differently, the idea of the word, though, is the same. It means displeasure. And the word displeasure here, indignation and displeased, it means to be annoyed. Okay, and the idea of this word, to be annoyed, they were annoyed, or they felt annoyed. And the reason is because this was an unjust or unjustifiable request. Okay, there was no. So the disciples heard this, and in their mind, there was absolutely no reason why they should have asked for this. It's completely unjustifiable. Okay, the word means to be grieved, means to be vexed, and it means to be indignant, as is translated in Matthew. They were annoyed and aggravated. The word grieved is a word that describes great sorrow, and it even means to be brought low. In other words, and here's like another word picture. They were fine, and then out of the blue, bam, they get punched right in the gut. I mean, it's like somebody just blew all the wind out of their sails. Everything is fine, and all of a sudden, it's like they get bad news and it just drops within them. This is the idea of this indignation, sorrow, grieved, vexed, annoyed, aggravated. There's a multitude of emotions. Now, very quickly, notice the cause of their displeasure. Matthew and Mark both reveal that it was when they heard the conversation between Christ and the two disciples. Okay, they were annoyed and aggravated that these two men thought to even ask such a question. Okay, now we're going to come back to that here in a little bit. Okay, But this is why they're annoyed. The cause of it is what they heard. In verse 24, I'm going a little bit in detail with this, but I really want to paint the picture. I want you to see what these men are going through and what they do. So with the cause of something they hear, notice the constraining of their displeasure. To constrain, the idea of it is to control, to move. Now, Matthew says they were moved with indignation. Their indignation, they were moved with, they were annoyed, aggravated with this grieving as well. They were moved with this indignation. Okay, have you ever, has something ever happened and then when it happens, it annoys you and you're just like, oh, whatever. But then it's like the more you think about it, the more annoyed and aggravated you get. Okay, you're not just annoyed, but now you're moved with annoyance. Your life is being moved, controlled, and constrained by this. The more you think about it, all right, this is what's going on. It's like, what did you think? What are they doing? Whoa! Why are they even talking like this? I mean, it happens quickly, but this is the idea. They felt a frustration in their heart, and it moved them. Now, what is interesting? Now, and I mentioned it last week, and this is one of the reasons why I really believe that Christ in his response, this direction is to these 10. If you remember last week, when we're going to look at another passage here in a few minutes, where this conversation has already happened, and we've already studied on this a while back, okay? But when James and John and their mother ask this, Jesus never rebukes them for asking it. He never tells them, you shouldn't ask this. No, what he does do is he tells them the standard or what they must do in order to obtain that position. Okay, then he goes even further and he lets them know, well, you might do this. As a matter of fact, you will go through this, but whether or not you're worthy is up for my Father to decide. Now, I think that's a very interesting concept. He doesn't rebuke them, but he does give these 10, though, some direction on this, right? He doesn't disapprove of James and John, but he is disapproving of them. Now, so 2 thoughts about this. Notice their attitude, all right? They're frustrated with James and John. Their attitude towards these men has changed. They are already full of themselves, like the 10. This doesn't help. Their attitude towards them change, and their actions towards them change. Now, because their attitude is changing, okay, it affects their actions as well. And this is pretty normal. When my attitude is changed by something, my actions are going to be changed. Matthew says they were moved by this indignation. The disciples this is the idea, they began to stand against or in opposition to James and John. Now they see James and John as the enemy almost. So the Lord is going to address the issue with all of these men in a moment, but notice that these men are standing or are opposed to one another. This is their attitude and their action, okay? But I thought about this in verse 24, kind of bringing it together, even though it's not in the verse outright. It's more of just a thought, the consideration or the considering of this displeasure. Why are they displeased, though? What is moving them in this direction? What is truly going on? What is the issue that needs to be addressed? That's the thing. And this is what Christ is going to do. Okay, in verse 25 through verse 28, the Lord is, of course, this is the rest of it, but this is the response to the disciples. So why are they displeased? What is going on? So the answer to this question is seen or is given in the Lord's response. Okay? Why are they upset? What's going on? So the Lord He's going to reveal this. Now, there is a very serious issue within the group that needs to be addressed. Okay? But what is interesting, now, this is an unusual tactic, but a very much, this is a very, what we see here is a very much a, we've all said it like, this is a teaching moment. This is like what's happening. We see that we are about to get a master class from Christ in how to deal with individuals when it comes to certain things like this. Notice that the Lord does not address the issue by itself. He doesn't even come out and tell the disciples their problem. He doesn't come out and say, you need to grow up and get your stuff together and realize this is your problem. He doesn't even do that. Okay? Now, this is not the first time the Lord deals with this issue. This is not the first time that this has been brought up. Okay? It may be that the other disciples, when they heard this from James and John, remembered the conversation that the Lord had with them. All right, so turn to Matthew 18. It's also in Mark, but we're going to stick with Matthew since we're going to be mainly being in Matthew. All right, Matthew 18. Now, we've taught this several weeks ago. Well, probably even several months ago now. Okay. But this issue has already been brought up. All right. It's already been brought up who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Mark had some different words that are within the conversation that Matthew doesn't. They're walking, they're traveling, they're talking about it amongst themselves. The Lord finds out. The Lord asks them. Luke is like, I remember right, it's Luke, they kind of ignore him and they don't say anything, and then eventually they say it. Mark, kind of the same thing. But at the same time, came the disciples unto Jesus saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom? Mark's gospel phrases it a smidgen differently. Let me see. I didn't put it down. Let me think here. There's a way I can pull this up. Oh, let me see. Hold on one second. Maybe we can. Nope, that's not. I'm looking for something here to be able to pull up. I forgot. I didn't type this text down. Okay, hold on. Is this it? No. Well, if I can't find it, I won't worry about it. Oh, wait, here it is. This is what I'm looking for here. Okay. Is it Mark? No. Is it Mark 10? No, Mark 9. It is Mark 9. Okay. Mark 9 in verse, is it 33? Yeah, okay. Turn to Mark 9. It's the same passage. So in Matthew, who's the greatest in the kingdom? Turn to Mark 9 at verse 33. Mark 9:33. He came to Capernaum and began in the house, or being in the house, he asked, what was it that you disputed among yourselves by the way? So notice Mark is letting us know they're having this dispute. He knows about it. Verse 34, but they held their peace. We even talked about that. They seem to have been a little bit embarrassed by this, right? And then Mark says, for by the way, they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. All right, and he sat down and called the 12 and said unto them, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and servant of all. And then he brings in this child. We also see this in Mark chapter number 9, verse number 46. Then there arose a reasoning among them, which of them should be greatest. Jesus, perceiving the thought of their heart, took a child and set him by him, and says the same thing about who's going to be the greatest. Okay, so I'll give you the reference. It was Mark 9, verse 33. If you're wanting to write it down, and then Luke 9 and verse 46. Luke 9, verse 46, and then Mark 9, verse 33. And the passages after that, and then, of course, in Matthew. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is that this is not the first time that these young men are disputing, debating who's going to be the greatest. Now, I mentioned it when we were talking about this, right? When they reasoned among themselves. Okay, now, I said it then, I'll say it now. They're reasoning among themselves because they all thought they deserved to be there. You know what I'm saying? They're not arguing. Peter didn't say, James, you're right. You should be sitting next to Jesus. Matthew, you're right. You're greater than I am. You've done more works than I have. You deserve to be by Jesus. That's not what these men are doing. No. These men are not doing this at all. What are these men doing? Well, I should be the greatest. Well, I've cast out more demons than you. Yeah, but I was on the mountain of transfiguration. Well, I'm not even supposed to be talking about that. Oh, I look at, I'm the one who brought the bread. Well, I was the fisherman. We were the first ones that he called. Oh, they're arguing. And the Lord, he corrects them then. So now here comes James and John wanting to know who's going to sit next to him in the kingdom. But now the Lord doesn't rebuke them. Now he turns around and he's rebuking the 10 for being upset. Now that's what's very interesting. Okay? And as we go through this, I'll give you my thoughts on that. All right? And why I believe that the Lord doesn't rebuke James and John on this, but is rebuking these men. Okay? So the response. So he's already dealt with this once. He's kind of dealing with it again. But the first time he dealt with it, he hears it, and then he says, all right, what were you talking about? I really don't want to tell you, but all right, we know who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Well, okay, yeah, I know. Hey, come here, little Tommy, or Joey, no, come here, Zechariah. Give him a good Jewish name. Come here, Zechariah. Come here, Daniel. Come here, Levi, or whatever. Okay, come over here. You see this little boy right here? If you guys want to be the greatest, you've got to become like him. You've got to become least of all and servant of all to become one of the greatest in the kingdom. He doesn't do that here. Now, notice, here we go, verse 25. So what does the Lord do? All right, so the Lord is going to give them, this is his response. So he doesn't come out and just condemn them. No, but what he does do is he gives them an example. Now, the example that he gives is the example of their issue. This is their issue. This is the problem. This is what he's addressing, and here's the example, verse 25. But Jesus called them unto him and said, you know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise of authority upon them. Here's his example. So instead of correcting the disciples with how wrong they all are, he gives an example that they can relate to. An example that they see and that they feel every day of their lives. Now, very quickly, there's 3 thoughts about this that I want to just bring out, and then we'll move on. In verse 25, notice the contrasting principle. In verse 25, but Jesus called them unto him. Matthew and Mark both use a word that is translated as but to show sharp contrast. Okay? But Jesus called them. Now, whatever the Lord is going to tell them, whatever it is, it will be in direct opposition to what they were thinking. Okay, this annoyance, this aggravation, okay, that they're having and experiencing, and this frustration, whatever it is he's about to say is going to stand in direct opposition to that. Not in direct opposition to what was said earlier by James and John. Matthew and Mark are both writing this. When they heard it, they were moved, but Jesus called them unto him. He is addressing this indignation. All right, so here's the example. It's a contrasting principle, but notice, secondly, the corrupt power. Now, the Lord brings attention to the authority of the Gentiles. He said, you know that the princes of the Gentiles. All right, Mark uses lordship instead of dominion, and but basically it's the same thing. It's a little bit different words, but it's the overall same meaning. I didn't go into that. Just stick here with Matthew, but it's basically the same thing. It really is, okay? Now, the reason he is focusing on the Gentiles, which is very interesting, is it not? You know how the Gentiles do this? Is to reveal, this is what's powerful, to reveal a comparison between the Gentiles and then their attitude and their actions. What Christ is doing here, he's showing them a contrast, but he uses Gentiles to make a connection that the same attitude and action that the Gentiles have in their dominion and in their authority he is comparing it to what they have as well. He is saying, you are just like these Gentiles. Now, that's very, very important. Now, the reason for the focus on the Gentiles, and the reason why this is important, is that to the Jews, the Gentiles were corrupt. It was corrupt power. The Jews felt firsthand the corruption of the power of the Gentiles, and more specifically, of the Romans at this time. But he doesn't say Romans, he says Gentiles. Why? Because remember, the Jews were under Babylonian captivity, under Assyrian captivity. They were, although the Persians allowed them to return to Jerusalem under Cyrus, they were under Persian rule. They were under Greek rule. Now they're under Roman rule. They have been under Gentile power for almost 500 years. Okay? Now, did the Jews have corruption in their government? Yes. But when showing how evil the corruption is, he is using the Gentiles. Because he wants to drive home the point that the same attitude, the same authority, the same dominion, the same lordship that the Gentiles use, you 10 gentlemen are guilty of the same thing. That's very powerful. Now, the power that the disciples desired could have led to this corruption. Now, remember, the Lord does not rebuke James and John for desiring a high place. As a matter of fact, he told them what they would have to do in order to obtain that position. The frustration of the other 10 seems to be what the Lord is focusing on. Now, it may very well have been that James and John's heart was in the right place, right? I mean, they are coming to Christ, and maybe James and John, along with their mother, maybe James and John really are. We get to verse 28. They want to be a minister. They want to be like Christ. They want to serve in the kingdom. They're willing to put others first. That is the standard that Christ has established. Okay. It may have very well been that James and John's desire to be on the right and left hand of Christ was there in order to bring about a good thing. Why? Because the Gentiles do not want to do that. Okay? So he's showing these 10, he's answering them. He didn't answer James and John like this. He is answering these 10. All right? Comparing your desire. It's just like these corrupted Gentiles and how these Gentiles are. Ungodly, unholy. All right? God rejectors. But now notice the conceited practice. So here we go. He's developing this even more, right? Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. Now the Lord brings attention to their attitude and actions by focusing on the conceited and self-centered attitude of the Gentiles. Now the reason the Lord focuses on the Gentiles is to bring attention to the fact that this is an unholy practice. Again, did the Jews practice the same thing? Yes, of course. Look at the Pharisees, look at the Sadducees, and look at the entire body of the Sanhedrin. They crucified Jesus Christ, a completely righteous, sinless man. Out of envy, they crucified him. They're just as corrupt, but he doesn't use them. He uses the Gentiles. Okay, to bring this sharp contrast, I really do believe of James and John, but to show them how corrupted they're like these Gentiles. Okay, but when bringing attention to their attitude, he reveals to the ungodly Gentiles how evil the disciples' desires were. These 10. Now, what is it that these Gentiles do? Now, Matthew says they exercise dominion. Mark says they exercise lordship. translated a little bit differently. And they that are great exercise authority upon them. If you want to know, it is Mark 9, verse number 42. You can go and reread that. But yeah, I mean, it's almost the same thing. Translated a bit differently, but you can see it and get a different reading of that. But he says they exercise dominion in verse 25. You know that the princes, the rulers of the Gentiles, exercise dominion. So I was very intrigued by these words, exercise dominion, authority. Now, the word exercise dominion, the idea of this is that it portrays a forceful mastery that subdues the will of another. It is forceful. Okay, now this is going to be in direct contrast to Jesus in verse 28 and what his kingdom is going to be. Forceful mastery. The verb carries an unmistakable sense of subjecting others to one's own control. The idea seems to be that they have the authority and the ability to subjugate others to their will. This is very controlling. Modern day, the American government when it comes to our taxes. If you don't pay taxes, what do you go? Well, you're supposed to go to jail, right? If you don't pay taxes, you tax evasion or whatever, you're supposed to go to jail or be penalized or whatever. What are taxes? We know what taxes are. It is the government holding a loaded weapon, okay, because YouTube is kind of weird sometimes, or having a sword drawn in their hand, and you will pay the taxes or else, right? I mean, that's all government. Okay, that's the idea of this, to forcefully subjugate someone. They are exercising dominion. They are exercising it. They are taking their force and they are pushing it. They're taking their power and forcing it on other people to cause them to do it. And notice what he says, exercise dominion over them. I love the word here, over. It's hanging over them. At any moment, it could come down upon them. And so there's this fear. All right. Notice the second words are and they that are great. They are the supreme ones. They are the first ones. This is the idea of great to be first. Okay. They exercise authority. Now, the idea of these words combined with the last set of words, exercising dominion, okay, when you combine these, is that of exploiting positional power for personal advantage. It's not just that I can make you do what I want you to do. I can make you pay taxes. But not only can I make you pay taxes, but I'm going to blackmail you also. I'm going to lie about you. I'm going to make something up about you. I am going to use my position of power and exploit you. I'm going to get something extra out of you. Okay, now, very important. Okay, and I think we're about to get some more insight onto this. Again, James and John, they do not receive this correction. They don't get it. But who does? These 10. Now, again, and I get it. Maybe it's my opinion. Maybe it's my thought. But I'm reading this. I'm studying this. Christ is telling these 10, you are not ready for this. You're not right. Your heart and your attitude is not in the right place. Now, notice the explanation. So we have the example, but notice the explanation. Super quick. Now, look at what he says in verse 26. But it shall not be so among you. Wow. What a powerful statement. It shall be not so among you. This will not be the way you treat one another. That's what he says. It shall not be so among you. You will not do this. This will not be you. That's powerful. I mean, that's Christ, like, in a nice way, calling them on the carpet, as it were. It will not be so among you. You will not treat one another this way. This will not be the way that you will have a place of prominence or a place of position in my kingdom. Ooh, wow. That's powerful. Notice the deficiency of these disciples. It shall not be so among you. Now, why does he say that? Because it was among them. This was their issue. This was their problem. Now, the Lord doesn't come out and just say that they are doing this. Okay, like he's not just saying, well, this is what you're doing. No. But it is implied. This is what the Gentiles are doing, and it will not be so with you. Listen, every single parent in here, we have all done that. The kids come home from school, the kids come home from sports, the kids come home from somewhere, and this is what you tell them, no, you're not going to do it. And what do they say? Yeah, but Ralph's mom and dad let them do it. I'm not Ralph's mom and dad. Now, you don't have to come out and tell them, well, you had to say, no, it's not going to be that way for you. Well, why do we say that? Because we see it in them, right? They want the same thing. And this is what Christ says. Well, it might be with them, but not in my kingdom. They run their kingdom that way. I am not running mine that way. They got to that place of so when Christ was here, the Romans, Julius Caesar, all right, 44 BC, right? Way before this. I get it. But by the time of Christ, all right, and I should remember the emperor, and I do know who it is, and I've just forgotten. But by this point, the emperors are already seen as God, okay? And we are getting, the Senate, the Roman Republic has fallen. It is now the Roman Empire. And within the Roman Empire at the time of Christ, they are already assassinating one another to get into the places of position and power. Julius Caesar, that happened to him, Mark Antony and A2 Brutus and all of that, okay? They kill him to remove him to put who they want to be in power. It was already going on in the Roman government. It was already happening. The Jews knew this. They saw it, okay? This is what Christ is saying. They got to that place because they had certain dominion. They forced their will over them, and then what did they do? They used their power to exploit it on them. Not in my kingdom. This is their deficiency. The 10, their attitude was corrupt and it was conceited. That's the point. They desired to be in this position so they might have others do their bidding. When you're reading the Gospels and you're reading the Word of God, when we read, we have to read it in this way. He is calling it to. This was the 10's attitude. What do you mean you're going to get that position? No, I'm going to have that. Well, what was their attitude? The same thing that the Gentiles were. They desired to be in this position so that others would do their bidding. Now, as you read the rest of these verses, the disciples desired to be great, or their desire was to be great and to be chief. He says it in verse 26, whoever wants to be great among you and whoever wants to be chief among you. This was their failure. They were deficient in this area of their life. That was humility, service, putting others first, putting themselves above other people. Now notice the development for the disciples in verse 26 and verse 27. Combine both of these verses. So we see their deficiency. It will not be among you, but notice their development in verse 26 and verse 27. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your servant. Now again, and I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse. I know that. But I'm really wanting you to see this. When you read James and John, they seem to be wanting to be great, but what does Christ tell them right here? If you desire to be great, you got to become a minister. James and John desired to be chief, but you got to become a servant. He doesn't rebuke them. He doesn't tell them. He just tells them, this is what you're going to have to do. This is the standard. Drink my cup. Partake in my baptism. Be who and what I am. That's very powerful. Instead of being self-conceited, put others first. If you desire to be great and to be seen, then you must be a minister. Now the word minister right here is, let me see if I'm going to pronounce it correctly. It is diakonos. They say, Brother Dan, why does that matter? What is diakonos? Okay, so diakonos is translated minister here, but if you turn over to 1 Timothy chapter number 3 and verse number 8 is translated deacon. Deacon. Now, unfortunately, in churches and things like that, over the years, deacons have been given a place of power. Christ right here, they don't have power. They're a servant. It's very powerful to me. What does it mean to be a minister? This is what the word means right here. It means to run errands and clean tables. Who wants to be a gopher? Not me. Who wants to be an errand boy? Not me. I think James and John wanted to be. Honestly, I really do. I believe that. I think James and John were coming to a point where they were like, God, I'll run errands for you. Which I do think, I know, and again, I think, we'll call fire down from heaven. The Lord says, you don't quite know what spirit you are. He's not rebuking them like in Matthew 20. Their attitude was a little bit different, but they were willing to serve Christ and to put him first. Again, I really believe this. Now, it means, so whosoever will be great among you needs to be a gopher. You need to be an errand boy. You need to be that guy that or woman, right? But when we say, hey, we need something to be done, it's not, oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm too good for that. That's powerful. That's not what I want to hear. I'll just be honest with you. I'm a pastor. I'm not a gopher. Okay. No, that's not what we're supposed to be. We got to pick up tables. Let's move them. We got to clean and mop and vacuum. Let's clean it. Let's do it. I have no problem. I have no problem picking up a vacuum cleaner and vacuuming church or something like that. But then he says this in verse 27. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Now, in the King James Bible, they like 99% of the time, I want to say 100, but there may be one time that I missed a couple times, right? When you see the word servant, it could actually be translated to slave. Let him be your slave, okay? And when I mean slave, I mean somebody's property slave. That's what it means, okay? If you desire to be great, then be nothing. If you desire to be great, become someone else's property. Have no life of your own, but give yourself to your master. In other words, they must change their view and opinion on what it means to be in charge and to have a place of importance. Back when I was in Bible college right after I graduated college, I started teaching a couple years after that at a little Christian school. And in Christian school, where I went every year, you would go to like a teacher training for like 2 days. You like go up on a Wednesday and you have classes all day Thursday, all day Friday, sermon on Thursday night and a sermon on Friday, and then you leave, go back, on Saturday. And at that time, and since I've been out of Christian education for 16 years or whatever, I guess they still do this. I don't know. But during that time, around 2005, there was a very, very big push within Christian education for servant leadership. Servant leadership. Training students to be servant leaders. You want to be a leader? Well, then you need to serve. Taken from this, right? And so you want to be in charge? Then you need to go clean some tables. You need to be an errand boy. You need to be a gopher. Run some errands. Clean the tables. You want to be a chief? Then you better become a slave and have nothing and be owned by someone else. Whew, that's tough. But this is their development. This is development. Notice in verse 28, last two things we're done here. Notice the explanation from the issue. Now, and again, verse 27, verse 28, I love this. Even as. The Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Let me, okay, I wanted to double check something because I forgot to type it out. Now, how are they to be delivered from this issue? Right? How are they to be delivered? You know, what can I do, or what should I do? You know, how are they to know how to live? Now, he told them that if they desire to be great, then they must serve. Now, of course, the idea is not to be great, okay? But he's dealing with their focus. So it's not like, I know I'm going to be great, so I'm going to serve, okay? Like a false humility. Like, we've all heard that, right? Now, everybody here knows I can't sing. So if I sit up in church and I'm going to sing a song today, don't listen to how I sing it. Just listen to the words. That's not false humility. That is, you know that I can't sing well, and I'm telling you, I'm going to butcher the song, but please hear the words. But then you have somebody that can stand up and sing, you know, this beautiful melody. And then they're like, I really can't sing, so, you know, shut up. You know you can sing. Stop that. Don't put on a show. Just stand up and sing for the glory of God. If God's given you a voice, use it. Be thankful for it. And when I say be proud of it, I don't mean like, I guess, self-conceited pride, but like pride in the sense of that what God's done for you. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm proud of what God's done. Go for it. Okay. Now, okay, so that's not the point. And again, I believe that the point is that James and John are coming to this place. And Christ tells them, drink my cup, be baptized. And you will go through, but that's up to my Father to decide if you're worthy enough for this. You men here, you're not ready. You are not worthy. It's not about just becoming a great individual. It's about becoming a servant to be approved by the Father. So notice the pattern to follow. What does he say? Even as the Son of Man. That is very powerful. Now, the conversation seems to have come very close to the conversation about the death and resurrection, if you remember, in the verses above this. Verse number 17 down through verse number 19. Now, the reason why that's important is because in those verses, Christ reminds them that he is the Son of Man. Now, the Son of Man was the Messiah. Okay? Christ is the Son of Man. He is going to be king. If there was anyone that should be served, it is Jesus, because he's going to be king. If there is anyone that should have people running tables and errands for him, it should have been him. He was going to receive the kingdom of Israel. Yet the Messiah, the king, is telling his disciples that they need to follow his pattern. And what was his pattern? He tells them, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister. Even as the Son of Man came to be a minister. The Lord's entire life was one of service. He served the Father and he served others. Now, big thing right here, you see the word in verse 28, ministered, minister, and then verse 26, minister. Okay, now they're slightly different words because not trying to get all tinsy on this, but they're used differently, so they're different words, but they mean the same thing. So when Christ says, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister. In other words, I didn't come for people to run errands for me. I came to run errands for other people. I didn't come for people to wash down and to wipe down my table. I came to wipe and wash down their tables. Now that is powerful. And then what is the practice to follow? So this is it all. Now the Lord is raising the standard of the disciples. Now, although he seems to be placing himself on their level, like, well, the Lord is bringing himself down. No. He is actually raising them to another level. All right? He is raising them. It is very natural for humanity to desire to rule over one another. Now, there's nothing wrong with it to a point, right? There must be someone in charge. There must be someone in authority. Well, of course. But the emphasis of the Lord is that instead of seeking to be in authority and in charge, we should seek to be in a place where we can accomplish the most good through serving other people. The Lord gives two purposes of why he came in verse number 28. He came to minister or to serve, to wipe down their tables, and to give his life a ransom for many. Now, the word many is not used by the Lord to show a limited number. Well, I thought he gave his life for a ransom for all. Well, he did, but the Lord is using this word to show the emphasis of the reach, the emphasis or the reach of the ransom. Okay, it's many, it's much, it's going to reach many people. Okay, it is a broad and reaching ransom. The idea is that it goes beyond their circle and his location of service. All right. Now, the word ransom is closely associated with atonement and redemption. Now, the word has many ideas today, but one of the primary understandings of the word ransom in Christ's day was something that was given in exchange for something else. Now, the early church saw ransom not as paying a price to appease God's wrath, because that's not the way they saw this. Okay, I'm talking like AD 150 is not. But they saw it as an exchange of swapping one person for another person. And it was seen as bringing victory and rescue to those who are trapped in sin. And so what Christ is telling them, this goes back to the cup and it goes back to the baptism. Okay, you need to be a servant. You need to wipe down tables and run errands. And you need to give your life in exchange for other people. You need to exchange your life for them so that they, all right, may get the gospel. That is challenging. Why? Well, because we all have we all have our lives, our own lives to live, right? We all are doing our own thing. And so Christ says, bring, again, in the idea of the word ransom, again, it's like, it means to rescue. It's like when we think of ransom, right? We think that the hostages have got somebody, and we've got like this whole idea. And even though that's a very similar idea, of it, and it is, but it is to rescue. There is an exchange. It is a complete and total deliverance. And this is what Christ says. Do I believe that James and John were very close to this? I really believe that. I do. I think that those two disciples were at a point in their life where they were beginning to be these errand boys, these gophers, these servants that wipe down tables. I really believe that. The other men, they're full of this pride and this exercising of dominion. What would it have looked like? Let me ask you, what do you think it would have looked like if when James and John said that, Peter spoke up and said, you know what, you men do deserve that. You are servants of God. What if Matthew would have spoke up and said, man, actually, you know what, James and John, you guys are better than I am. I know I don't deserve it. Simon the Zealot, the great political, guy, the rebel rouser for Jews would have said, James and John, you got me beat. I mean, you're right, man. I mean, that's not for me. They didn't, but that wasn't their attitude, was it? No, their attitude was, well, what do you think? You deserve it? And Christ says, this is your problem, gentlemen. You desire to exercise the same authority and dominion that the Gentiles do. It's not going to be like that with you. You want a place in my kingdom? You're not going to do that. You want to be great? You better wipe down some tables. You want to be chief? Then you better become a slave and sell yourself to somebody else and become their property. Why? Because that's what I've done. That's what I've done. I've given myself to people. That's very challenging and very hard. So who will sit next to Jesus Christ in the kingdom? Whoever can do that. That is not me. And so, nope. I am thankful that I will be in the kingdom and I want to get some rewards. Amen. And then get some inheritance when I get there. But sitting next to Christ, It's not on my bucket list, okay? But I hope that you see what Christ is doing. We should strive to be this way, though. We should strive this. We should shoot for this, and understand that this is what Christ desires for His people and followers. Amen. And thank you for coming tonight. We'll have a word of prayer and see everyone on Sunday morning.